Hey, FreightWaves fans and friends, ladies and gentlemen, and neighbors. Thanks for tuning in today on FreightWaves Now here on Thursday. An interesting, very last day of the month. And we are, to celebrate, we are bringing you not one, not two, three market experts today to talk to you about what is going on in the weather and a few little interesting anecdotes about how people are, how the commercial freight industry is handling getting the supplies in the freezing cold, or are they in all cases? And we've also got, Sultan of Sonar, Zach Strickland, talking to us. What does the Midwest have to do with freight and things operating right now? And then also, finally, last but certainly not least, we've been talking to you about it all week. Our chief economist, Ibrahiim Bayaan, is going to tell us what he's able to ascertain about the economy, even with having a little bit of a short supply of data in some cases. So let's begin. Nick Austin, ladies and gentlemen, tell us what's happening. It's more of the same in certain cases, I know. With the
That's right.
But how are some places handling some of the challenges?
Well, they're handling it fairly well, considering. I mean, when we're talking about wind chills of 50 or 60 below zero, and that's what we're talking about across the Midwest right now. It's still that Arctic outbreak, the polar vortex, whatever you want to call it. It is still got a firm grip on the Midwest and the Great Lakes region today. So the U.S. Postal Service has suspended delivery. This started, I believe, it was either yesterday or the day before. They suspended delivery across lots of zip codes in several states across the Great Lakes region, Illinois, Minnesota, and a bunch of other states. Again for today, so there won't be any mail for a lot of zip codes in parts of the Midwest today. We know the old USPS motto is neither rain nor sleet nor snow, but that the motto does not include wind chills of 60 below zero. Nobody should be out in that kind of cold. So I think it's a good decision to do that.
So you're not saying that they're failing us on some level?
I don't think so at all. You really you have to be careful in temperatures and wind chills that are that cold. Now, the other thing is that in Chicago on the commuter transit train rail system. Yes, it looked like that the railroad tracks for that were on fire. They weren't quite, but what they were doing is they have gas-powered heaters that are set up alongside of those tracks for this kind of weather to keep those tracks warm enough, because if they get too cold, they can crack. Or at certain places where they're hooked together, they can get separated.
Wow.
Because the cold weather makes them contract. So they're taking care of that. So hopefully that will be running smoothly, although most people hopefully are just staying home anyway in a warm place and not even stepping out in the cold. It's brutal.
What else was happening in the Northeast you told me about with just the brutal... Did you say they're shutting some... They weren't allowing truckers in?
Right.
Okay.
In New York State.
Oh, in New York State.
There is still a ban on all tractor trailers for certain highways in New York State.
Wow, crazy.
Particularly in Western New York. There's still a lot of just really, really cold weather and a lot of heavy snow. There have been a lot of accidents across parts of Western New York, some of the other Midwestern states as well. And a lot of it, look at this, it's not a big area, but this little snow band right here coming right off of Lake Ontario into Western New York. Places like Oswego, New York, Watertown, snowfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour. So it's going to add up to It's going to add up to about 2 to 3 more feet of snow for some of those areas today, along with a lot of wind. So a lot of blowing snow too. So those are the three major effects on transportation as far as this outbreak.
Thank you for that update. So apparently, the supply chain does get disrupted in certain respects with the weather, and those are some interesting examples. But in the brutal Midwest, where it's been super cold and that polar vortex is just hanging out, taking its time, we've got some interesting data. Zach, tell us about what in the world is going on.
Thank you, Chad. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. Everybody knows that it's cold in the Midwest right now, but I saw something interesting. One of the biggest mover markets in terms of outbound volume was Detroit over the last day.
Really?
So I pulled up the chart of the Outbound Detroit tender volume index.
Yes.
And you can see this huge big spike right here. Boom. So
Boom
I looked
is
into
right.
it. I looked into it, and the capacity actually was not impacted at all. And one of the reasons that I found that this happened was, you know, there has to be like some sort of imbalance that creates some sort of capacity crunch. And
Yes.
I have this orange line right here, which is actually the head haul index, which is the difference between the outbound and inbound load volumes.
Okay.
And you can see right here that it's dropped sharply over the last day, indicating that inbound volumes have increased more than the outbound volumes. So,
Yeah,
hence,
so we have an imbalance in the market right now, right?
Yes.
But the imbalance is that it's really a backhaul market.
Yes.
In general.
It is a backhaul market in general. If you see down here, this negative 61.27 value, that's an indicator. Anytime that you have a value over negative 50, that is a very backhaul market. You know, your Miamis, your Seattles, your Phoenixes, where there's a lot more volume going into those markets versus coming out. Detroit has a ton of automotive, you know, they kind of consume a lot of parts and pieces. They don't ship a lot out in relation to that volume coming in. So this market is already kind of a backhaul market, and it became increasingly so over the last day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is good insight. You are following the data. Yeah. That's awesome. What else do you have to show us?
So just on the same topic of the weather, because everybody has seen what the polar vortex can do, Siberia or whatever they're calling it, I wanted to pull up a map of the tender rejection index for Chicago and tender volumes for Chicago, just to kind of let's see what's going on in this market right now. Yesterday we had a big jump in volume, surprisingly, as temperatures bottomed out at negative 25 degrees, which is death cycle for a truck to operate in.
And yet the show must go on, apparently.
And yet shippers don't care. Think about this. People are going inside. They're probably getting online. They're buying stuff. Not that this is going to be that fast of an impact, but at the same time, everybody still has their orders that they have to put in. There's still production that happens. People have to work. So this freight is going to sit there, and it's going to pile up if people don't go in there and take care of it over the next few days. I think we see that the temperature is going to thaw out by the weekend. So trucks should be able to get in there, but these kind of short-term disruptions can have massive impacts throughout the freight market.
So let me clarify here. So you've got the outbound tender reject index in white, and that is what ticked up. But you're cross-comparing it with the volume. In Chicago.
So I pointed at the tender rejection. The volume up here ticked up yesterday. Tender rejections ticked up yesterday, as you would expect.
Yes.
The tender rejection index came up. The volumes kind of recovered a little bit, but tender rejection stayed a little bit more elevated, meaning that, you know, people are still not there. At this point, I doubt there's shippers that are going to be as open. You know, they're probably not placing those orders right now because they've had a couple of days of this brutal cold. Yeah. This freight's still going to kind of sit on the dock.
Well, and there's a lot of freight that would be freezing right now on the dock, literally,
absolutely.
Right? As we were talking about.
I would look to the temperature controlled stuff, you know, to have a lot of trouble. Not that there's a ton of that, but at the same time, that's going to create some problems, probably short term. But the Midwest is still the most active region of the country in terms of volume, even though it is frozen.
That's strange.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thanks for that update, Sultan. You know, it's like, so we're trying to figure out what's going on with volumes here as we were rounding out at the end of January, what's going on with tender rejections. The song, you know, in a lot of respects remains the same, but it's, you know, it's an interesting market in the Midwest, yes, where it is frozen. And now we have our chief economist. What's up, Ibrahiim? Good to have you.
How you doing, Chad?
Doing great, thank you. What do you have for us?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the environment that I've been in over the past couple of months. I mean, you heard Nick and Zach talk about how they analyze the data and how they're able to glean different insights from the kinds of data that we have in Sonar. It's been an interesting time for economists because we've been operating in an area where there hasn't been as much data as there normally is. The government shutdown, which recently they came to a temporary resolution last week.
But they're still backed up.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And it's not like suddenly, okay, now the data's back just flowing.
Well, right, exactly. Like, not every statistical agency was affected by the shutdown.
Okay.
But a couple of the key ones that we use to track the overall freight market environment were. So the Census Bureau, for example, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, both of those didn't have funding during the government shutdown. And so as a result, some of the things that we look at, like trade, retail performance, inventories, GDP was supposed to come out yesterday, and it still hasn't come out, and it's all just been disrupted by the shutdown.
So how are you supposed to do your job? As an economist, you just blame it on the government, or what do you do?
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on when this kind of thing happens. Like if the shutdown had happened earlier in the year, I don't think it would have been as big of a deal, because we kind of knew the economy was in a rapidly growing phase. So you don't need official data to tell you that things are rapidly growing when everything around you is telling you that as well. But this was a particularly challenging time because we know that the economy is sort of transitioning here, that we're coming off of this really high growth period into a slower growth period. And so you have policymakers and economists that are trying to figure out like how severe the slowdown is, what's the appropriate policy to follow in this kind of environment. And they have to do it without data, or at least without all of their data.
Okay, but we do have things like, you pulled up here the chart, the goods exports year-over-year change.
Yeah, so this is an example of one of the areas where we're missing some of the data.
I see.
If you look here,
Yeah.
The last actual data point that we have for goods exports is October. Right here, we're here in January trying to figure out what's going on in trade, and the last data point that we have is October. And so, when these kind of things happen, you have to draw in other data sources to kind of supplement what you would normally look at.
Okay. And that is why you have drummed up for us here another chart. Which one's it? Good exports year-over-year change. U.S. as cross-compared with?
This is some data that we have in Sonar from the Institute of Supply Management. This is survey data that we get. And I pulled up a specific component of the ISM index, which is new export orders.
Okay.
Right? And what I wanted to show here is that historically there's a pretty tight correlation between movements in new export orders and the year-over-year growth in goods exports in the economy. Right?
Sure enough, parallels pretty closely, doesn't it?
And typically the ISM data will lead the export performance by about a month or two. So, if you zoom into this year, you can see that the ISM data was telling you about the spike that was about to occur in export orders, which came a couple months later.
Yeah.
And it's also showing the slowdown. But the good thing about the ISM data is it's private data, right? It's not collected by the government or released, so it's not affected by the government shutdown. As a result, we have data that goes a lot further than the goods export data that we have.
Yes, how nice.
And so if you're trying to figure out what the export environment looks like, you can see still deteriorating as you get towards the end of the year. This actually gets refreshed tomorrow morning. There'll be a new ISM release tomorrow morning.
Okay.
And it'll tell you more about just what the export outlook looks like. And so this is just like an example of the kinds of things that we have to do when you don't have the normal data that you would typically do.
Yes, and we are on FreightWaves Now, right? So we're trying to bring you what is happening right now. Thank goodness for the ISM. Do we have other good news of what's happening right now, data sources?
Sure. So another example of some data that's been missing is durable goods orders.
Yeah.
Now, durable goods orders is normally one of the indicators that I track to give me an advanced look of what's going on with manufacturing production.
And it cuts off right there on November 30th, I saw.
Right.
Okay.
And the reason why we care is because when you look at goods orders, it'll give you a good advanced look as to what's going to happen with industrial production. This is the orange line here is industrial production for durable goods.
Okay.
Right? And so normally I like to look at orders because it'll tell you sort of like a month or so in advance what's going to happen with industrial production. But again, we don't have the orders data.
Wow. Okay. So this is what's happening right now. A little bit of a lack, a little bit of a supply chain disruption, so to speak, with some of our data. You even have one more example for us?
Sure. Well, exactly. So the overarching theme here is just like when you run into these situations where some data might not be available, there's usually multiple sources that kind of speak to the same sort of environment. Not all of it's government data. Some of it's government data, some of it's private data. You can actually use our own data sometimes to get a feel for what's going on in a particular aspect of the economy. But the idea is just to be a little bit more resourceful when thinking about data.
Do you, in these cases, really strongly rely on private data? And by private data, do you mean like data that companies are responsible for, or are they like think tanks, or is it for profit? Not, I mean, how do these go?
It comes from different sources. Sometimes it's universities that'll collect data and release it. So, for example, like the University of Michigan tracks consumer confidence, and they release consumer confidence, which isn't affected by the government. But there's a lot of private companies that have their own data that they take and they utilize to glean different insights. So, for example, ADP, they have their own measure for employment that they get from their payroll data that they collect. And so it's a lot of different sources. But just to give you the idea that there's other ways to get a feel for the economy besides just official government statistics.
Well, and what would you say is your takeaway right now, best as you can infer and extrapolate, analyze, assess from the data sources available to us right now? What's the state of 2019 here on January 31st?
Well, I mean, I think this kind of goes along with what we've been saying for a while now, but it feels like the economy is slowing down to what we would consider more normal. Like, I think when you look back at 2018, the thing about 2018 is it was abnormally strong in a lot of different regards, especially as you talk about things that are important to freight. So like trade movements were stronger than normal. Industrial production and manufacturing activity was stronger than normal, with the exception of housing, which was pretty weak during 2018. Everything around freight seemed to be very strong. Yeah. And I think as you get to the end of last year and the early parts of this year, you're looking at a sort of a moderation to what we would consider more normal levels of things. Okay. Now, I wouldn't go so far. I mean, people kind of have the tendency to look at the stock market, which has struggled over the last month and change. And they get fears about whether or not we might be falling into a recession. I don't necessarily see those signs yet. I actually think growth is still slightly above what we normal right now. Yeah. But I think it's trending down to this sort of average kind of growth that you would experience in an economy that's already pretty mature. And I think as you get to the second half of next year, or second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, you're going to be looking at just average growth in the economy instead of this abnormal growth that we saw over the past several quarters.
That's an interesting point, because I remember at the end, I think it was around November, you, on a webinar, you and Craig, our CEO, Craig Fuller, was saying that it's like it's been such a hot year that things are you're still going to have some heat coming in. It's like a great strong economy doesn't just die of natural causes. It has to sort of be murdered, I think was the quote.
That's right. Total, it'll be slightly strong, trending down to average. But again, there's this caveat behind all of it, is that you don't have any policy mistakes along the way that slows things down. This is one of the things that I was really concerned about the government shutdown about. Because when you think about sort of the things that cause a recession, or how you take an economy that's functioning pretty well and have it go south quickly, it's usually some kind of policy mistake that you can trace it back to. It's like the Federal Reserve hiked interest rates too quickly, or like the fiscal policy was off, when it should have been on, or what have you. But a lengthy government shutdown is that kind of thing. And in fact, I think the White House came out at some point and said that if we had a shutdown that lasted all through the first quarter, growth would basically be zero during the first quarter. So you're taking an economy that's functioning pretty well, even though it's moderating, and taking away all the growth that's out there. And so you do look for those kind of policy mistakes, or you worry about those kind of policy mistakes along the way. I think if we can get out of our own way, the economy is probably fine for the rest of this year.
Yeah. Okay, well, you heard it here. What is happening right now? Thank you, Ibrahiim. Thanks to all of our market experts today. As we're bringing it to you on the very last day of a frigid January. It's been cold. It's the seasonality of just like feeling the winter blues is upon us in a lot of ways. And I think we do have a lot of policy questions. And I think my takeaway right now is just that hope springs eternal. will, and we can hope that the government can figure out what sort of get out of their own way and make some compromises and figure some things out so that we can get on our way here in all things commercial freight and the entire supply chain. So thanks for tuning in once again as we're bringing it to you every single day at 4 o'clock here on FreightWaves Now. Catch us on Twitter and feel free to share the love. And also we're on FreightWaves.com, of course. So in the meantime, we'll see you tomorrow as we wrap things up and head into the weekend. We're here every single business day. So stay safe out there on those treacherous roads, and don't worry, be happy.